Tavern with us Sundays at 11 a.m. on AM 950 and check out our early release episodes that drop Thursdays on your favorite podcast apps.
Crooner's Supper Club invites you to enjoy drinks, a delicious dinner, and live music from both big-name local and national artists in a wide array of styles. Before or after your show, check out the new Maggie's Lounge, a perfect spot to visit with friends. It's open Wednesdays through Sundays beginning at 4:30 with cocktails and light fare. And you don't need a ticket to enjoy the great atmosphere of Maggie's. Crooner's Supper Club off Moore Lake and Highway 65. A little piece of old-school nightlife in the 21st century.
With a look at your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Cloudy tonight with a low of 21, then partly sunny on Wednesday with a high of 38. For more than 40 years, the Great Wall Restaurant has been serving up Szechuan and Mandarin favorites. The Great Wall is located just north of 50th in France on the Minneapolis-Edina City line. Check them out at greatwallrestaurant.us.
Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host, guest, random reptoid, or chupacabra may not necessarily reflect those of AM 950 Radio, its affiliates, or its sponsors. Now, it's time to step into the unknown. There are things people experience but never talk about. A shadow moving in the corner, flickering of the lights, a disembodied voice. We invite you to talk with us. Share your story, share your experience, because this isn't just your story. This is our story. This is GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun.
And this is GhostBox Radio on AM 950, where every night we talk about the paranormal, ufology, Bigfoot, and so much more. My name is Greg Bakun. Thank you very much for joining me tonight on this wonderful Tuesday. We're in the season of Christmas, right? That's obvious. You can't escape it. But one of the things, as trying to think about how do we celebrate Christmas, but still kind of keep a spin on the weird and unusual that this show is so good at bringing you. I think there's an area that we don't really, I think the majority of us in the U.S. don't really think about or even consider during any of this time of year. If you go up to some Americans and you ask, did you realize that a Christmas Carol is a ghost story? You might get a number of them saying, I had no idea, didn't even think about that, which it very much is. There's a long history of Christmas this time of year, going back to some very scary folklore. And I wanted to talk about that, and I wanted to bring in somebody who would be able to talk with us about that tonight. So tonight we're going to be talking about Tim Rayborn's book, The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World. And this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. Before we bring Tim on, I just want to introduce him. Tim has written a large number of books and magazine articles, especially in subjects such as music, the arts, general knowledge, and history. He lived in England for many years and studied at the University of Leeds, which means he likes to pretend that he knows what he's talking about. He's an almost famous musician who plays dozens of unusual instruments from all over the world that most people have never heard of and usually can't pronounce. He has appeared on more than 40 recordings, and his musical wanderings and tours have taken him across the U.S., all over Europe, to Canada and Australia, to such romantic locations as Umbria, Marrakesh, Renaissance chateaux, medieval churches, and high school gymnasiums. He currently lives in Northern California with many books, recordings, and instruments, and sometimes a demanding cat. He's pretty enthusiastic about good wines and cooking excellent food. You can find out more about Tim and the other books and stuff he's written. Go to timrayborn.com. That's Tim, RAYBORN.com. Tim, welcome to GhostBox Radio.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. Looking forward to talking with you.
More of a pleasure today or tomorrow? No, I'm just kidding. That's something that I kept giving Tim the wrong day to show up.
Well, It is interesting, and we'll get into it. Tomorrow is actually a special day in the scary Christmas calendar, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So yeah,
That's interesting. I mean, and that's really what we are talking about tonight. As I mentioned, the book is called "The Scary Book of Christmas Lore: 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World," and this is a new book, isn't it?
it just came out November 14th, I believe it was published. So by Cider Mill Press, which is a division of HarperCollins Focus.
And tonight we are going to be talking about some of the folklore. Also, Tim is going to read some excerpts from the book and kind of give us an idea, because there's okay, I don't even really know where to start, but I think I'm just going to start with this. Why would this time of year, do you think, bring so many of these these tales, especially around this time of year?
It's interesting because so much of what we do think about modern Christmas, certainly the way that it's celebrated in the United States, but also in Britain, in the English-speaking world, if you want to say, is largely an invention of the Victorians. We go back to Charles Dickens and the Christmas Carol, and also to Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, who brought German traditions. He was German, and he brought German traditions to the crown. So they were the ones that really popularized things like the Christmas tree and Christmas cards and such. But so a lot of our traditional celebrations definitely have roots in things that started in Britain about 150 to 170 years ago. And by 1850 or so, the Christmas tree was pretty well established in Britain. It took a little longer to get to the United States. And various other things that we now think of, like Christmas cards and certain types of foods and presents and those sorts of things, became much more common. In earlier centuries, there is evidence for decorating trees of certain types, but it wasn't really a thing. People would bring greenery into their homes. They might bring holly, or they might bring evergreens and such, and use them to decorate. This was popular certainly in Tudor England. The Puritans in the 17th century kind of squashed down on that, but it was certainly a tradition. But the idea of gift giving, if gifts were given at all, they were usually given at New Year's or around the Feast of the Epiphany, which was January 5th, 6th, depending on the calendar. So the idea of exchanging gifts on Christmas is a more recent development. But alongside of the traditional Christmas celebrations that the Victorians introduced, there was also a long tradition of Christmas ghost stories. And it wasn't just Dickens. Dickens was tapping into something, and he inspired quite a few more, but there were a lot of stories about that. And so we have to start looking at this, and we wonder why. This is what is it about this time? And then we start looking at traditions and legends throughout Western Europe and Northern Europe, and certainly into Central, and even all the way out as far as Greece and Turkey. And anthropologists and other researchers started noticing that there was a long tradition of things between any time during the month of December to, say, mid-January, of very strange sort of traditions and rituals that sort of paint the nighttime as one of terror, actually, than one of celebration. And it's a very interesting juxtaposition from what we think of as being the happiest time, the most wonderful time of the year. There's actually this deep-seated tradition of tales of terror and monsters lurking in the vast wilderness that are waiting to kill people, essentially. So we have to start looking at those, what that might mean. So that's a brief introduction. We'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. But,
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's interesting too, because I mean, when you really think about it, the modern day Christmas is kind of marred in maybe not tales like that, but certainly kind of threats. You know, if you're not good, certain people aren't going to show up at your house.
right.
If you are, or the idea of Krampus also. I mean, I think Krampus over the last 20 years in the US has picked up some steam, hasn't he?
Absolutely. Krampus is the most famous. There's a lot of those. There's a number of different holiday spirits in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and going into even northern Italy that do very similar things. But Krampus is the one that people have really sort of latched onto. Deep traditions of Krampus going through Austria, through the Alps, largely any of the Alpine countries. You'll find in these remote villages, they'll have these festivals. It's usually on Krampusnacht, which is December 5th, and that's the night before St. Nicholas's Day. And Krampus and St. Nicholas in Christian tradition are very inextricably linked to one another. They're very important. Though, as far as we can tell, the first known Krampus celebrations are only from about the 16th century, but the first mentions, but it's possible that he represents something much, much older, from a pre-Christian tradition of even like the Greek satyrs and those sorts of things. This is sort of goat god and the goat figures and those sorts of like mischievous characters and agents of chaos and such. So So traditions and belief in Krampus, and yes, indeed, the original story was not that if you're naughty, that you'll get a lump of coal in your stocking. In this case, it's Krampus accompanies St. Nicholas, and if you've been naughty, Krampus throws you in his sack and takes you away to beat you and possibly torture you. So it's a considerably darker and more. And Krampus is usually portrayed in these days. There's these wonderful masks and costumes that revelers use, and they're sort of kind of hybrid goat things with big long horns and claws, and they'll walk through the villages in these processions with their little birch whips, and they'll lightly sort of thwap people as they walk by. But it harkens back to a much darker tradition of punishment and death if you did wrong. So yeah,
unbelievable. And I mean, I forgot all about Saint Nicholas. I mean, I forget that we get visited twice, by strangers outside of our house. And I remember putting the shoes outside my room,
right.
Maybe there might be a little something in there.
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're in Minnesota, and there's a strong Scandinavian population there,
Absolutely.
Of course, obviously. So there's long traditions of visitations by Nicholas, who in Europe is still seen as someone different than Santa Claus. So in the United States, they've been kind of conflated. They're often conflated as the same person. So yeah, absolutely. But Nicholas, throughout the Alps and throughout the Germanic things, is very often accompanied by Krampus or other outcast spirits, monsters, people condemned for various reasons, and they're like his enforcers, basically. So he brings candy, he brings toys, but there's also this threat that comes with them.
Well, and as it should be. We're talking with Tim Rayborn and his book, The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World. I would remind people, if you have a question, put it in the comments. I mean, this is incredibly fascinating. Emily has a question for you. When we were talking about why this time of year brings up so much of that, why Christmas, Emily had asked the question, is this because winter represents the end of the year cycle, or the end of life cycle?
Absolutely. It's tied in with winter solstice and the rebirth of the sun, which is an ancient tradition. The megaliths in Ireland and Britain were meant to mark the winter solstice, and those are 5,000 years old. So people knew that this was an important time when the light was at its darkest, but the light had to return. And so these rituals would be set up to try to ensure that. But during that time, it could be a dangerous time, particularly in Northern Europe, where it can be dark for, you get into Northern Scandinavia, it's dark 22 hours a day, and maybe you only ever get twilight, that you don't get a whole lot of sun. So it's a fragile time between life and death as well. And a lot of this, the terror of the forest is also the terror of the snowstorm and the terror of famine. And, if you don't have enough food, we these days can sit in our comfortably heated houses and watch television and celebrate Christmas. But it was a very dangerous time. If you didn't have enough stock food preserved for the winter, if you didn't have enough grain, if your crops failed, you could very well be facing starvation. So there was, I think a lot of this is mythologized awareness of that real risk that the forest and the night and the snow can bring very real death very quickly to anyone who strays too far and strays away from the safety of the village or the safety of the home.
So some of these are, and it kind of like how it's set up nowadays with children. A lot of this is they're meant as warnings, and not warnings. It's more to try to keep people in line to a certain extent, right? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. These days, it's more children behave, but there's an element of it in some of these tales as well. You need to do all of your chores before Yule. You need to sweep up. And again, some of that also had to do with what was expected of people. If you needed to milk cows, if you needed to do things, not doing that could lead to real big repercussions. So it wasn't just a question of wash behind your ears and sweep up. Sometimes there were farm chores that had to be done to ensure the safety of the animals, or that, things were brought in. So if you didn't do that, it could lead to a lot of problems. So there had to be consequences for those things.
Now, how did you get interested in this, in particular, this arena that created the book?
Well, it's interesting. I've written a number of books over the years on various paranormal topics, as I was saying before we started.
Yeah.
And going way back about 7 or 8 years now, I've done a series of them. And for this particular publisher, I'd already written a book on the paranormal and one on the end of the world, stories of the end of the world, and conspiracy theories. They actually approached me and they said, well, we want to put this book out about Christmas. Would you mind researching it? So they, in this case, it was something they proposed to me. And of course, I jumped on the chance to do it. So yeah, it was the publisher's idea. I just did the research and wrote the book.
Was it hard to, because there's some deep digging going on here. Was it hard to get this information? Some of the more more of the far out stuff?
It depends. Yeah, there are some good internet resources. There's some really good books. There's an excellent book on Krampus and all of the Krampus traditions. There's books on Scandinavian traditions. You might have to dig a little bit, but there's a lot of folk tales and things out there that are readily available if you know where to look. So it was actually fairly easy and quite fun to put together.
Do you have a favorite?
Favorite?
Favorites, figure or story or whatever.
A whole bunch. I mean, if you'd like, I could read a couple of things from the book if you'd like. How are we doing for time?
Why don't we do this? Let's go ahead. Let's take our first break. Sure. When we come back, we can go ahead and have Tim read for us. It's a great book. We're going to talk more about it. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
Feeling like people just don't get the vibrant rainbow unicorn that is your celestial essence? Have you been wondering how you stepped into this infernal, mundane timeline full of muggles, NPCs, and toilet paper shortages? Here at Magus Books and Herbs, we get you, and are staffed with real-life unicorns just waiting to help you rediscover your shine. So come explore your magical side with books, herbs, incense classes, and more at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis or online at magusbooks.com.
Hello, I'm Jody, also known as Witch Jody on social media. I opened Midwest Witchery and Healing in historic Stillwater because as a nurse, I love to help others. When you come and visit Midwest Witchery and Healing, you will find everything from divination and magical services, classes to ritual tools, jewelries, handcrafted candles, witchy gear, and much more. My store is a safe environment for all on their own unique path. Look for the purple door. Find out more at MidwestWitcheryHealing.com.
Reach your highest level of consciousness and well-being with MetamorphosisConnections.com. MetamorphosisConnections.com is an online directory of the best holistic and metaphysical practitioners to help you make your most informed choices. You can search MetamorphosisConnections.com for classes, events, wellness and life coaches, plus metaphysical products and shops. You can also search for a wide array of healers from all modalities, including EFT, sound healing, energy healing, light therapy, ancestral healing, shamanic healing, reflexology, past life regressions, hypnotherapy, yoga, and more. And if you're not sure where to start, the search feature on MetamorphosisConnections.com is tailored to help both those who know what they are looking for and those who are just starting. Come explore the possibilities for your higher self by visiting MetamorphosisConnections.com. Their experienced practitioners can guide both beginners and those that are already on their spiritual journey. That's MetamorphosisConnection.com, your link to direct you on your spiritual transformation.
Thanks to everyone who's continued to support AM 950. Good news, the AM 950 2024 calendar is ready to go, featuring photos that took around Minnesota and important progressive dates. Members that sign up with a one-time $25 membership will receive a 2024 AM 950 calendar as a thank you. Make a one-time $50 or $100 donation. You'll get the AM 950 calendar and the brand new AM 950 tote bag as a thank you. Go to am950radio.com for all the details on the membership. That's am950radio.com. Thank you so much for supporting AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
And as Matt McNeil says, if you like what we're doing over here at AM 950, please consider signing up and becoming a member of our station. Go to www.am950radio.com. All the details of what that entails is there. And if you like what I'm doing, please go and check it out and consider doing so. Thank you very much. We are talking with Mr. Tim Rayborn. We're talking about the scary book of Christmas lore, 50 terrifying Yuletide tales from around the world. And Tim, I mean, this right now, people can they can order the book, but it's on back order, right?
It's on back order. Yeah, I think it actually did better than they were planning. It now appears to be. There are some local bookstores that may have acquired copies, but it appears to be, it might be a couple weeks. So if you're hoping for a Christmas read, you might be disappointed at this point. But some of the stories carry on into January, so you can spread the fear a little bit longer.
Absolutely. And then you still get your book. You might get it a little bit later, but then you don't have to worry about the rush for next year. So
yeah, exactly.
There you go. So yes, I would love to hear something from the book, if possible.
Let me read a couple of entries, since these are so close to what we've just been talking about. There's some interesting legends about St. Nicholas himself. Switch glasses here, and I'll give you a couple of sections. So the first two entries in the book are about St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas and the Butchered Children is the name of the first. That lets you know where we're going right away. And then Krampus, who is his eternal companion. I'll just read you a little bit. Since St. Nicholas is at the heart of many of these tales and legends, we'll begin our journey down the dark paths of Christmas terrors with him. St. Nicholas is a handy alternate name for Santa Claus, but there really was a St. Nicholas who lived in Asia Minor in what is now Turkey from about 270 until his death on December 6th, 343. December 6th is still his feast day. In his own time, he was Nicholas of Bari, a Greek bishop in an age when the Roman Empire was not officially Christian or even close to having a majority of Christians in its population. Not too much is known about his actual biography, but quite a few legends sprung up about him during and after his life. Many of these stories tell about his generosity and his secretly giving gifts to people or money to those in need. He was quite possibly the first secret Santa. One such story says that he prevented 3 girls from being forced into prostitution by dropping sacks of gold through their window each night for 3 nights, which allowed their father enough money to pay dowries for them. There are various others. The most famous legend about him concerns the fate of 3 children and a very evil butcher. The story goes that these 3 kids were out in the field and lost track of time. They came to a town and to a butcher shop which was lighted inside. They were tired and hungry, and now they were lost, so they knocked on the door. The butcher answered, and they asked him if they could have some food and a place to sleep for the night. He was only too happy to welcome them in, but he had no intention of giving them a warm welcome. Taking out a sharp knife, he killed and butchered each of them, dismembering them and placing the body parts in the barrel with brine for curing. He intended to sell the pieces as ham to unwary customers when the curing was finished. It brings to mind the story of Sweeney Todd. As a long time went by, some accounts say even as much as 7 years, but Nicholas learned of the crime and went to the butcher. He commanded that this evil man open up his salting barrel, and the butcher could do nothing but comply. Once open, Nicholas made the sign of the cross over it and commanded the children to rise. The 3 dismembered bodies were miraculously repaired, and the children were brought back to life. No word on what happened to the butcher, but later legends say that he was forced to work with Nicholas ever after as a penance for his sins. We'll meet some of his incarnations in this book. So some of the evil people that accompany Nicholas are said to have been this butcher who dismembered these children to sell as meat.
Wow. And I was thinking about when you're reading it that I don't recall a Rankin Bass holiday special trying to stop children being or women or girls being put into prostitution.
Right.
But
it will be a Disney film about this, I'm afraid. But, So Nicholas, many of his companions, which take different forms in different countries, some of them are connected with this legend, which appears to be a later medieval legend. It seems to have come about sometime perhaps in the 12th or 13th century seems to be the first appearance of it. But and that may have been a justification for some of the pageants and festivals that were already going on with Nicholas, where you had a sort of synthesis of pagan and Christian, where the Krampus represented an older tradition, the traditions of the wild hunt and the monsters of the forest, and St. Nicholas was brought in to Christianize it, so they synthesized it, and then they needed a story for why they traveled together. So there's a look at like how folklore can kind of meld into a new tradition can be born out of different stories from different layers and different time periods.
it's interesting. You know, I find it. Do you when you're going through this research, do you ever just kind of think, I can't believe this stuff has lasted this long? Like like anything with Saint Nick. I mean, you're talking back in the 3rd century.
Yeah.
And it's like, but yet it is still relevant today.
Yeah, it is quite remarkable, actually. And some of these stories certainly were passed on via oral tradition for very long periods of time. Yeah. And they come from a time when people, they weren't just stories. People really believed these things. These things actually held people in a grip of fear. Well up into even the 18th, 19th century, there were probably some in remote villages that actually, did fear these things. And I think that these festivals were in some way a way of enacting that out or ritualizing it or working out their fears. So it was a kind of way of role-playing these events, maybe to hold them off. But certainly it was a way of acknowledging that those things ran very deep in the collective sort of consciousness of a community. Definitely, and certainly children believe them.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just incredible, and I mean, and imagine all of the ones that have happened, like all these traditions or this folklore that we have lost over the years that we don't even know about.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's a shame. So I mean, there was a great move in the 19th century among folklorists and as sort of early anthropologists to try to collect these sorts of things. But unfortunately, a lot of them overlaid their own sort of opinions and things about them. We do have, like, for instance, the Brothers Grimm to thank for the collections of their fairy tales. And those, as you know, if you read the originals, they're not the Disney ones. They can be quite grim, as the name implies. They're very dark. And then Hans Christian Andersen in Denmark wrote his own based on not really based on older legends, but he created new fairy tales, and some of those are grim and horrific. Like the original version of The Little Mermaid is not the Disney version. And then there's stories like The Red Shoes, where the girl gets her feet cut off because it's the only way she can escape them, from forcing her to dance. So these were dark tales. Absolutely.
Do you think that there's a problem with the Disneyfication of some of this stuff, or do you think that as long as the original is still available for people to look at, that it's not that big of a deal?
I don't see it as a problem. I think that these stories are very robust and can take many different forms, and I think that every version has its place somewhere. I don't necessarily see that that's a problem, and I think certainly for very young children and such, the kind of Disney tales are certainly appropriate to introduce them to the stories, and maybe when they get older they can read the other ones. But I think that's not something I see as a problem at all.
Oh, and I suppose any of them that's out there, if they were to stick to the source material like directly, there'd be no happy endings.
Well, there are some horror films in recent years, of course, that have actually attempted to do that sort of thing. True. There are a number of retellings in novel form that's been a popular thing in recent years. Is sort of retellings of fairy tales or old Greek myths, but like updated in sort of novel form. Sort of, yeah, it's a common thing. It just shows the stories are very robust and can take on lives of their own.
Very true. Actually, come to think of it, I'm much more annoyed that Disney would actually change their own films, because you see Pinocchio have a cigar stuffed in his mouth. He was forced to smoke it, stuff like that. Right. And then the fact that they're changing around. All right. What about Krampus?
Krampus is, of course, the granddaddy of all European winter holiday monsters, a fearsome, furry demon with a terrible attitude that can't wait to get out in the snow and cause mischief. He's certainly not the oldest beastie haunting the holidays, but these days he's definitely the most famous, so it's natural to begin our ghoulish gallery with him. Krampus accompanies St. Nicholas and has his very own night, the eve of St. Nicholas' Day. In fact, the night December 5th. Krampusnacht is the time when he is most active and when children have the most to fear. He's often depicted as a horned, satyr-like, goat-footed demon carrying a large basket on his back, into which he will toss naughty children to drag them off to terrible tortures. He usually drags change and carries a ruta, which is a bundle of birch branches that he uses to swat misbehaving children. If that's all they get from him, they should count themselves lucky. His name might come from the Old Bavarian Krampen, meaning dead, or the German Kramp, meaning claw. Either word seems like a good etymology for him. He has long been associated with St. Nicholas, and tales of Krampus and his punishments might date back as early as the 7th century, though it seems that the earliest written records of this frightening figure date to the end of the 16th or early 17th century. It's possible that fears of a menacing alpine winter visitor predate Christianity, and that the legends and festivals were intertwined with Christian belief when the church realized that they couldn't be eliminated entirely. So this fearsome night creature was given a holy role within the church to punish sinners, especially children. The Nazis even banned Krampus celebration, but the people were having none of it, and as soon as those losers were dispatched, Krampus came right back bigger than ever.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, now was part of it true of the folklore around Krampus that he could not escape a copper pot, or is that something that I've just seen in other media that someone has created over time?
I'm not aware of that, but it could be. I mean, there are so many different traditions. You have certainly there isn't just one, of course, and with scattered across Austria, Switzerland, southern Germany, Bavaria, you have these isolated communities and villages, and it's entirely possible that they invented their own versions of stories, and that someone in the village 20 miles down the road might have a very different version. So it's entirely possible that that's not one that I've heard, but it wouldn't surprise me if there was something that was added to the lore and the legends over time.
Well, and I'm embarrassed to say I heard about that on American Dad. So, I mean, I'm not, don't.
A reliable source, that's
where I get all of my literary prose from. As it happens, American Dad, they have it where Santa is actually the evil one, and right. Krampus was not great, but better. But I mean, I suppose that's kind of the fun part too, is being able to take some of those stories, kind of what we're talking about, the Disney stuff, and being able to kind of switch them around and
absolutely
have some fun with them.
they're very malleable, but they live on because of that fact that they can be changed around. And you'll see that in most folklore. A lot of folk tales, there are a lot of folk tales that we're very familiar with that actually have very similar versions all around the world. And it doesn't always mean that they came from the same place and changed later. That might, but it also kind of shows that there might be this sort of wellspring from the sort of human unconscious, if you will, that keeps bringing these sorts of tales and things up around the world in various places. There are different versions of the Cinderella tale, for example. There's lots of different stories that seem to resemble one another, but don't necessarily have obvious connections. So it's entirely, the night monster is a thing that has plagued humanity for as long as we've been human. The fear of the dark, the fear of the predator. And that goes back to, worrying about night, worrying about hyenas and lions on the Serengeti, basically. The idea of something dangerous hiding in the bushes and the need to stick together and form community groups to keep these things at bay.
Yeah. Now, Joanne had said, when we're talking about stuff that's being altered or whatever, and she says they are trying to burn Humpty Dumpty and Wizard of Oz because of witchery. I'm not familiar with that, to be honest, because that's but I mean at the same time, I mean, maybe I'm an optimist here. I think regardless of if people are against some of this stuff, I don't think you're going to get rid of it, quite frankly. I think it's the minority.
No, and it's not even about, I think it's not even about there are things like, the Wizard of Oz books, Baum's books have been in trouble ever since they were first released, way back in the early 20th century. There have been people that are opposed to them. And anytime you write anything that says this person wrote, there's going to be somebody somewhere. But a lot of it, I think, is that the human culture, human people have a need to face the shadows. This is something that's very important. And this is why we are interested in these things. And it has nothing to do with their imagined versions of Satanism or devil worship or anything else. We all have a shadow side to ourselves that we need to face up to. And this is something that I think a lot of people who are uncomfortable with that try to repress and push away. And I think a lot of these book burnings and bannings and things are people that can't confront these things. So they externalize it and put it on a demon out there rather than looking at the darknesses within themselves. And these monsters, I think, represent something about, they tell us about ourselves and about the things that we expect of ourselves and when we fail and what we're afraid that we're capable of. Like, well, if I can imagine a story about this evil monster slitting open children's bellies, does that mean I'm capable of doing that myself, or is that just in my imagination? These kind of morality and ethics questions plague us, and so being able to face our own demons, our own inner demons and shadows, these kinds of stories, I think, can help with that, can help us do that.
I think that's very true. And just thinking about just the universe of Oz, as it were, and kind of what we talked about with what. Especially folks in the U.S. who don't know like all of these type of folklore that's prevalent from this time period. The same with that universe of Oz, where before that film came out in the late 30s, how small part of what Baum created in Oz that film generally represented. Out of his wealth of his breadth of work.
Yeah, it's just one story, and it's not even the complete story. There's like a whole extra ending, I believe, in the book, isn't there? That's not in the film. And exactly. So I have a very low opinion of book banners, as you might imagine, and I think ultimately they will fail because they don't have anything. There's no reason. They're afraid of themselves, is what they're afraid of. They're not, they've externalized something, but what they're really saying is that they're afraid of something inside them.
And let alone the fact, too, for those who are interested, and I think it might still be available in certain Blu-ray sets of Wizard of Oz. I've always been fascinated by Oz. All of the films that have been made prior to the 1930, what is it, 39?
37, I think.
37?
37, 39, maybe 39.
Whatever year Gone with the Wind came out. I think that is 39.
I think it's 39,
But the amount of films that were made, silent films that were made prior to that, just really is incredible of what people had forgotten. So many people don't even know what they've forgotten. Never had a chance to see it. So
exactly, yes, indeed.
So the book, once again.
No, please go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. What was that, Tim?
Oh, please go ahead. No, that's fine.
The book is called Scary Book of Christmas Lore: 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World. With we have Tim Rayborn on. And Tim, did you have any stories that, because you kept it to 50, that you had to throw out or made honorable mentions, or were you pretty set on your 50?
I think I was pretty set. I tried to branch out a little bit from the mainstream of Central Europe and look at a couple, and maybe in the third section I'll read a couple of those. There's a really great story from Iceland and a really great story from Japan that would be worth sharing, because there's lots of interesting things in other parts of the world as well. And Iceland has some very, very strange Yuletide terror tales. So yeah, these were the ones that I kind of picked. Some of them you start seeing the same. You might see a different monster, but they have basically the same function. So it seemed rather redundant to include 3 examples of the exact same creature, just that had different names. Again, and maybe in Austria it was named different than in Switzerland, but essentially they function as the same characters. There's a lot of overlap. So,
and is that overlap mainly because of the proximity of the area?
I think so. I think they're very old. These are very old tales that kind of disseminated into these areas that were a little more isolated. So yeah, you'll have different places might have the same creature, but might have a different name or a slightly different role, but the story is essentially the same. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, I mean, that's cool. And I am actually very excited to hear the one from Japan, because
really interesting.
Yeah, I could only imagine it being pretty remarkable and pretty. I don't know. I mean, I just think that, I think one of the things that I never think about, to be very honest, sometimes, and I'm just going to be very honest about it. It's I sometimes forget to think about outside of the Western world.
Yeah.
I mean, not on any purpose or anything, but you get so drawn up that it's nice to be able to kind of hear what is going on other places as well. That's, I mean, sounds silly to say, but yeah.
Yeah. No, it's easy to get. Yeah, I mean, we are products of our culture, so we will look to our culture first for stories and such. But it is interesting to see how things like this can be reflected in other cultures and such as well. So, and Japan actually nowadays has a very strong Christmas tradition. They've gone full on and in on it with the tree and Santa and all of that. But there's some weird things attached to that as well. So, yeah,
well. Of course.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, why don't we go ahead and do this? Why don't we go ahead, take our next break so that we can get to more reading of the book. Once again, the book is called The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World. We are talking with Tim Rayborn. You're listening to GhostBox Radio on AM 950.
Magus Books, your multicultural spiritual supply store. Stop in and expand your horizons with books, classes, readings, and supplies at magusbooks.com or in our shop at 1848 Central Avenue Northeast in Minneapolis. From the best incense to beautiful statues, we have supplies and books for your spiritual explorations. Come in and chat with our knowledgeable staff and get what you need for your next adventure, whether you're fighting ghosts or opening your third eye. Check us out today at magusbooks.com.
Hello, I'm Jody, also known as Witch Jody on social media. I opened Midwest Witchery and Healing in historic Stillwater because as a nurse, I love to help others. When you come and visit Midwest Witchery and Healing, you will find everything from divination and magical services, classes to ritual tools, jewelries, handcrafted candles, witchy gear, and much more. My store is a safe environment for all on their own unique path. Look for the purple door. Find out more at MidwestWitcheryHealing.com.
If you own a holistic or metaphysical business and are looking to expand, then you need to be listed on MetamorphosisConnections.com. It's a network where you can grow with like-minded practitioners and reach new clients. MetamorphosisConnections.com is an online directory you need to list yourself and your business. Our platform makes it easy for you to create listings of your products and services, and you can also choose to list your classes, events, and so much more. MetamorphosisConnections.com helps you create weekly and monthly promotional ads targeted towards your potential clients and promotes them for you via social media and newsletter. There are clients searching for your specialty right now. Let us help them find you. Start your listing today so you can share your own unique gifts and talents by finding the level of membership that best fits your needs. Let us help you reach your clients that are searching for what you do. Visit MetamorphosisConnections.com and sign up today.
With a look at your AM 950 weather, I'm Patrick Lilia. Cloudy tonight with a low of 21, then partly sunny on Wednesday with a high of 38. For more than 40 years, the Great Wall Restaurant has been serving up Szechuan and Mandarin favorites. The Great Wall is located just north of 50th in France on the Minneapolis-Edina City line. Check them out at greatwallrestaurant.us.
AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota.
And join us tomorrow on GhostBox Radio with Greg Bakun. We're going to have on guest author Anthony F. Sanchez. He's going to talk about his book, UFO Nexus, A Journey into Alien Realms and Cosmic Secrets. I've been reading this book. It is something else. I think it's going to be a great conversation tomorrow, and I'm very much looking forward to it. We have on with us Tim Rayborn. He's the author of the scary book of Christmas lore, 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World. That is, you can order it through Amazon. And once again, this is also part of the associates system we have over at Amazon on my website, ghostboxradio.com. Go to Ghostbox Book Club. We have this book listed there. If you buy it through Amazon through us, we get a little kickback if you wouldn't mind. Otherwise, can go ahead and do that just on Amazon anyway. But Tim, it doesn't matter because the book is so popular that no one could get a copy.
I think there are select bookstores that still have it, but it's a little bit on back order right now. So hopefully it should be available soon. So
not a bad place to be, is it?
No, it sold better than I think they thought it would. So
congratulations on that. That is great news. Now, this is 50 stories. Is there ever thought of a follow-up book in the same vein?
We're talking about it. I can't say anything else about it, but yeah, there might be more. Yeah, we're talking about a series of things that might look at other holidays actually. So we'll see. There's no shortage of folklore around most of the major holidays that could. I mean, I'm not sure you could do a scary book of Mother's Day lore, but there's probably.
But I'm sure the
maybe mother-in-law lore, but.
Well, and I'm sure the Hallmark monster could be prevalent in the book.
That's terrifying. Hallmark movies are terrifying, of course.
And unfortunately, I can't think of the name of that woman that's in every Hallmark movie that she was on Days of Our Lives. But
well, there's only one plot. There's like 600 movies, and it's the same plot basically.
Emily would like to know: if you're based on the Twin Cities? I know the answer to this, but you're not.
Oh no, I'm actually. You said it at the beginning. You had a little section that's from my older biography. I'm actually in Washington State now. I live in out in the Pacific Northwest at this point. So yeah. No. So it's how long have you been out of California then? Almost coming up on 2 years now. So yeah,
just a decade. That's all. Tell Amazon to update your bio. That's all I'm going to say. So you got some more reading for us, right?
Yeah, do a couple more. We've talked about sort of Germany and Austria and Switzerland and such, but these tales extend quite a bit farther out. There's a huge collection of Scandinavian things from Norway and Denmark, and Iceland has its own really unique things. Iceland itself, and we'll do Iceland and then a little bit about Japan. Iceland was largely uninhabited until the late 9th century, when it was colonized by people who left Norway to escape kind of what they saw was increasing oppression from the monarchs there that were trying to consolidate power. And they moved to this sort of barren, that wasn't completely barren. It actually had forests and grassland in the 9th century. And they took with them their animals, their livestock, and they started a new community that was almost somewhat democratic. There were no kings, there were no earls, there were none of those sorts of things. And for several centuries, they were very proud of the fact that it was much more of a community farm-based society. But they also have some really weird legends that grew up over time. They were still pagan. They worshiped the Norse gods. Iceland didn't officially become Christian until the year 1000, but pagan belief persisted for several centuries after that, as we can find in the Poetic and Prose Edda, which are the Norse myths that were written down in the 13th century. But one of my favorite stories from Iceland, and there's a whole bunch. There's stories of trolls and giants, but one of my favorite is called the Jólakatturinn, which is the Yule Cat. And they still celebrate this. There are lit up statues in Reykjavik that are even up right now. You can actually see.
Oh, cool.
The idea of a Yule cat might seem appealing at first. A soft, cuddly little feline to warm one on a chilly evening and perhaps curl up in front of a cozy fire, purring and content. Or maybe he brings presents to good children, like so many other fantastical beings. But oh no, definitely not. The Jólakatturinn of Iceland is terrifying, but for what might seem really mundane reasons. First of all, this is no mere house cat. The Yule cat is enormous in size and lies in wait in the dark to exact revenge on hapless children. What is their crime? Their clothing. Yes, you see, an old folk custom in Iceland was that children who did not do all of their chores who did do all of their chores would receive new clothes for Christmas. Now, most children these days cringe at the thought of Christmas clothing. They dread receiving either socks and underwear or some horrible holiday sweater that they will be forced to wear at the next family gathering while shriveling up in embarrassment. But for children living in the harsh and cold climate of Iceland, new winter clothing would have been most welcome, and they were expected to wear the new clothing on Christmas night. Why? Because the Yule Cat would come and check up on them. Yes, this gigantic feline would creep into every farm and village on Christmas night and peer into each window to see what the children were wearing. If they'd been good, they would be adorned in their fabulous new Christmas clothes or have them at hand at least to show off. But if the children had been bad, i.e. they hadn't done all of their chores, and didn't have at least one new item of clothing, the cat would do two things. First, it would eat whatever dinner was made for them, but going hungry was the least of their worries, for next he would drag the naughty children out of their homes and eat them as the main course. Written legends of the Yule Cat only date back to the 19th century, but the tradition is probably much older than that. The Norse goddess Freya was said to ride in a chariot drawn by two cats, and a number of other beings could shapeshift at will, so it's possible that belief in a monstrous cat originated in pagan times. But it might just as easily have been an invention of worn-out parents who needed the children to pull their own weight around the house. In addition, it seems to have become a tradition so that those who were better off would be mindful of those who were not. The poor might need the charity of some new, or at least new to them clothing to stave off the dreadful fate of being snapped up by the ravenous monster cat lurking in the snowy wilds outside of their dwellings. If you could avoid getting eaten, you were probably going to have a good year.
And what was not included in that story is that the monster cat eventually retired to the city of St. Michael, where it tries to trip its owner down the stairs every morning. His name is Linus.
It's happened to me too. I've fallen down stairs thanks to a cat trip. Yes.
How interesting is that? The idea of this cat that's looking in children's windows to see what they're wearing.
What they're wearing, yeah. Mm-hmm. And it goes back to that notion of pulling your weight. You know, if everything wasn't done to winterize the farm, you could be in trouble. So it was more than just don't be bad. So yeah.
It's a very serious motivation, isn't it? Because as kids, you know, and we were all kids that you know,
I wasn't, but okay. No.
Well, some were just dropped on the planet Earth. I understand that. But you know, the idea of like, no matter how serious the situation is, as kids, we're just like, whatever, you know? So yeah, you need motivation. Now, Emily also had wondered, because she was wondering about if you're in the Twin Cities or not, was because she was just curious if it might be in local bookstores here.
It might, yeah. You could check Independence or Barnes & Noble. They might have it. Yeah, it has. Some people have seen it in various places. I've heard that even some airport bookshops have it. So you can try that.
Cool. That's really neat. Yeah. No, God, those are really interesting. Now, I really would like to hear the Japanese one, if I may.
We'll do one last one. This is the story of Yuki Onna from Japan. And of course, as you know, Japanese have a particularly horrific spin on ghost stories. If you've ever seen The Grudge and The Ring and those sorts of things. So
any anime, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very long tradition. So I'll read you this. This is a story from Japan. Yuki Onna, or the Snow Woman, isn't specifically Christmas related, but she is a type of winter spirit that is sorrowful and frequently terrifying and might well be glimpsed at this time of year. While the Japanese love Christmas celebrations, they are also mindful of their own rich and often frightening folklore. She often appears in the second half of January, so a little later on, a time when traditionally there were New Year celebrations. As with European legends, we see a connection between a time of revelry and a sometimes horrid ghoul that would arrive to spoil the fun. She usually appears as a beautiful young woman with long black hair dressed all in white, seemingly one with the snow itself. There are many legends about her, and these can range from sweet to sorrowful to horrifying, depending on the regions where she pops up. It's not quite clear what Yuki Onna is. Some tales say that she was a young woman who perished in a snowstorm, or was led into a forest in winter and murdered, while others say that she originally dwelled among the gods or on the moon. She came down to Earth to experience this world, but was trapped here and now cannot leave. Any of these reasons could be enough to make her a spirit of murderous vengeance. Legends about Yuki Onna date back to at least the 15th century, when the acclaimed poet Sogi claimed to have seen her. He said that she was at least 10 feet tall, with completely white skin, but when he tried to speak with her, she vanished. Her stories are both sad and sometimes violent, a warning to all who venture out into the cold nights of a Japanese winter. And yet some of her appearances are fairly benign. She might be seen asking for water. If given cold water, she grows in size, but if given hot water, she evaporates. Other tales tell of how she knocked at the door of an older man's home asking to be let in to warm up. The home's owner did this, and she stayed for a time and then went to leave. When he tried to stop her and took hold of her hand, it was cold as ice. She then transformed into a burst of snow and drifted up the chimney. But other stories are less wistful. Sometimes she appears to travelers with a child, asking them to hug it. If they do, the child and the hugger will become covered in ice and snow, and an unfortunate mortal will freeze to death. If the person refuses to hug the child, Yuki Onna will shove them over the edge of the nearest hill to plunge to their deaths. Sometimes Yuki Onna haunts forests, actively seeking out victims. When someone comes by, she will attack and freeze them and then suck the seiki, or essence, out of their mouths, leaving them a frozen husk. Children have especially desirable seiki, apparently. Some legends of the malicious Yuki Onna say that she enjoys ripping the livers out of the victims. Almost all of them include her freezing her captives to death in one way or another. Other tales of Yuki Onna say that she will call out to a traveler, and if that person answers, she will attack. On the other hand, different legends warn that she will call out to a traveler, and if that person ignores her, she will attack. So basically, you cannot win, and the real lesson here is to stay home when it's snowing at night.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of, because, okay, so yeah, you're right. We don't want to meet her ever.
No, basically.
The basic line there. But also, so much of what you've been talking about so far, like the last one, there's a reason for it. There's not necessarily a moral to it, but a reason for why kids should be helping against Monster Cat. What's the there isn't one here though, is there?
No, I think that's pretty typical of a number of Japanese stories. The vengeful ghost, is very popular in Japanese ghost lore, and many people have claimed to have encountered these. And there's all sorts of urban legends about. They're often young women. They're often were horribly murdered or perhaps violated and murdered in some way, and so they then come back to exact revenge at the spot or near where they actually died. This is actually a very common. If we go back again to The Ring and The Grudge and those sorts of films, we see that the idea of the vengeful young woman Japanese ghost is has a long tradition in Japanese folklore.
Do you think that has to do with trying to leave, like telling people leave young Japanese women alone? Like,
I wonder if it also maybe something to do with very stratified patriarchal systems and such, and how young women in particular in historical times would have struggled to break free of those. There might be something to do with that. It's possible. I'm not an expert on Japanese folklore, but it seems to me there could be a connection there. Well, it doesn't mean that she's a winter spirit. This one in particular is only met in January in the snow. You wouldn't see her in June. So
well, and that's your next assignment, is writing the 75 book series on Japanese lore.
Yeah, seriously,
a lot of it, but
yes,
there's something, and I guess that's the word I was kind of hesitant to say when we in the last segment when we're talking about some of the Japanese lore, because there is something beautiful about it. And I think that the idea of the lady is beautiful, and I think many could picture what she could possibly look like, but there is that real bit of attack. I guess. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. It's different. It's a different flavor to the monsters of European folklore, definitely. But sometimes they also appear beautiful, but then they reveal themselves and they have gigantic jaws or a large gash in their throat. They're like the beauty hides something terrible underneath. That's also typical of many Japanese ghost stories.
Well, and that's not surprising. And there is something always about as a balance and a beauty to, as far as anything I see Japanese, that it just really it's really cool. I thank you very much for sharing all that with us.
Absolutely.
Once again, we're wrapping up a couple minutes here, but the book is called The Scary Book of Christmas Lore, 50 Terrifying Yuletide Tales from Around the World, written by Tim Rayborn, and possibly available somewhere.
Go out and look. It'll be your assignment. If you don't find it, Krampus will come. So.
the first hide and seek book that ever, if you find it, good luck. But there's something there's part of your inaccurate bio that I once again I have to be totally in agreement with, and I had to bring up, which was that apparently you like great wines, which who doesn't, and cooking excellent food. I love to cook. What's excellent food for you?
I love all sorts of different cuisines. I'm actually vegan, so I actually do mostly plant-based cooking, and I love everything from like Italian and Middle Eastern to there's some very fine Northern European foods that can be made into those sorts of things. But I'm a big fan of Mediterranean foods.
Well, you've been you traveled all around. I mean, you've been to gymnasiums, so I mean, it's
exotic and beautiful places. So yes.
and as we're wrapping up here, you play a lot of instruments. You said some that we can't even we couldn't even be able to say. What is one of them?
I mean, I it's more of a joke than anything. I've my main focus is on medieval and early folk music and such of the Europeans, but I was for a long time very involved in doing Middle Eastern folk music and Central Asian folk music as well, and some other things. So yeah, I learned to play a lot of instruments from those cultures, which is basically, it's just there's only a small number of instrument families, so once you learn one, it's not that difficult to pick up another one.
Was that your
guitar-like instruments and drum-like instruments?
Absolutely.
And those sorts of things? So yeah.
Was that your draw to the UK?
No, actually, well, I went to do a PhD in history. I did my PhD in medieval studies and medieval history, and I also worked as a musician while I was there, and did some of my first writing, professional writing, while I was there as well. So yeah.
I think it's funny. As someone who's lived in the UK for years, as you have, a number of years ago, I took a trip to the UK around this time of year, actually, and all my coworkers were like, "Oh my gosh, that's so amazing!" I mean, they imagine all of UK, all the United Kingdom, all Britain looking like a Charles Dickens Christmas, and I told them I'm going to Birmingham,
right?
And you know exactly where I'm going with that. Birmingham is it's fine. It's a working class.
It's not pretty.
There's nothing pretty about it. Nothing at all. And they're all expecting, me to have a stove, top hat and, big scarf around my neck. And it's like, no, this is Birmingham.
You have to be out into the small towns for that. Yeah. So,
not at all. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's have you on in the beginning of the year. Let's talk about some of your other books.
I would be delighted to do that. It would be great fun.
Us, absolutely. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to be talking UFOs. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Come on, you know it's true. Work is almost bearable when the Stephanie Miller Show is on. AM 950